Welcome back to Effluvium. I am delighted to welcome a very special guest. All of our guests are very special, but this is a notably special guest. We have Alexandre Helwani. He is a perfumer, writer, and an historian of perfume. And we're going to be having a discussion that will begin with an interview. We're going to pick his brain and ask him a few questions. Not hardball questions, though. I don't like doing those. As you know. And then we'll move into some discussion on scented materials, the provenance of scented materials, fragrance materials scarcity, and also the rarity of materials, and maybe some changes in that since, the prime of commercial perfumery. There's shifts that have been noticed in the past 20, 30 years. So we'll talk about that, and we'll also talk about ritual and spirituality in perfume. And there may be some other great topics that we will materialize through organic conversations. So this should be a great discussion. So we're going to take a look at the chat very briefly here. We have Philippe Alex. Hello there, my friend. Scent of the day was Au Parfumier Thé Noir from Bulgaria. That's a lovely choice. That was actually my favorite of that particular line. I'm also fond of Thé Bleu as well, Thé Bleu. And we have Pat Lester. Good afternoon. Yes, it's afternoon for both of us, it would seem, right? But it could be any time of the day or night for some of us who are tuned in. We currently have 4 people on right now. We're just going to give a little bit of time for other people to file in, and then I'm going to bring in our guest who is in the green room at the moment, backstage, if you will, and I see him there patiently waiting. We have Noah Drucker here. Scent of the day, Amouage Myths Man. And I might share my scent of the afternoon myself. This was a recent acquisition. This was released in 1990 by Jacquemot, and it's called Anthracite. See if we can get a good view of that with the glare. Let's see. I'll try to do that. It's a beautiful bottle, very sculptural in design. Love bottles like this. It's a 30 milliliter. And I would say that this is almost like a combination of Poison, Cabotine from Grès, and maybe Eau de Soir, Sicily Eau de Soir, but more than that. It isn't just merely a mishmash of the 3. Quite lovely. So there's a greenness and an amberiness, and I love that contrast between green and amber, or green and vanilla. So it's a lovely addition to the collection. We have supply and demand here. Scent of the day, Oud Mineral from Tom Ford. And now we have 7 people tuned in. We're going to give it just a few more minutes. Just a reminder that you can buy me a coffee to help support this content. And I'll just show the pinned comment. This is pinned so that you can refer back to it and also use the link, buymeacoffee.com/Joseph Cole P. Just an update. I have closed the offer for 4 full bottle grab bag. I may introduce that in the future, but I want to take some inventory of my collection before I reintroduce that. But in the meantime, 6 cups will get you a generous sample pack from my rather expansive collection of samples. All right, so why don't we get things started here, and allow me to introduce our guest, Alexandre. Hello.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Well, I'm quite good. I must apologize because I'm at the moment outside because I was in the middle of a very extensive meeting, so I couldn't get home. So I tried to make as much as I could to be here tonight, but I'm quite ecstatic.
As am I. I'm glad that you could make it. You and I both have a pretty busy schedule, it seems, lately, so I can relate to that. I'm kind of switching between my full-time job and doing, this other thing that I love as well. So I can relate to juggling with very, disparate things at times.
Yeah, exactly.
So why don't we get things started? So I love to ask a series of questions of my guests. I consider everyone who I invite to this to be fascinating people within the fragrance community at large. And I always like to ask about the origins of one's passion in fragrance. So the first question that I always like to ask my guests is, what is your earliest knowledge of a connection with scent and fragrance?
Well, technically, my earliest knowledge of connection to scent would be when I was a child, because my brother used to work at LVMH. He used to
Ah,
bottle
I see.
Dior fragrances, in
Mhm.
bottling facilities. But I didn't care much at the time for fragrances. The real moment where I met fragrances was when I lived in Dubai. I was in high
Mhm.
school in Dubai, and at one point after school, I was a bit bored, really, of our activities,
Mhm.
and I decided to go. Well, the people outside are a bit active.
Rather jovial.
So I, yeah, they are. They are. I really must apologize for it. There was
It's fine.
literally
It's
a
fine.
mistake
It
at the
adds
time.
to the energy. Like, it's a good
This
energy.
is Paris. This is
Yeah,
Paris.
love it.
So, anyways, so I was in high school. I didn't know what to do, and I decided to go to the souk at one point, where I found basically the perfume souk in Dubai, in Dera, and
Mm.
this is when I really discovered the world of fragrances, because the perfume souk in Dubai is this sort of dark place, a known place, very small, narrow alleyways that you just
Mm.
kind of meander through. And there I discovered all the incense and the frankincense and the benzoin and all the resins.
Mm.
And this is where and when I really discovered the world of perfume.
Mm.
Really happy, I
And
must say.
it was a real hoot as well.
It is. I'm sorry. I hope it's not too
No.
disturbing. Otherwise, I'll have to find another place, which I can. Uh, but yeah, basically that was when I discovered fragrances in Dubai, in the souk. I was pretty much 14. Literally finding the raw materials in the raw state.
Mm. Mm. That's some great early exposure, and that would explain, how you're so well versed in your ability to assess and analyze and take in with all sides of your brain these materials. So that's fascinating. Um, were there some early in that development? Were there some fragrances that you gravitated to when you were younger? Were there any that you wore early on that you still have a fondness for?
Well, the first fragrance I actually wore was Egoist by
Yes.
Chanel, because a friend of mine was working at Chanel, and she told me to wear Egoist. She thought that this would suit me in a way. So this was the first fragrance I wore, but the first fragrance I bought was Endymion by Penhaligon's. And I had the,
Oh.
yeah, exactly. I remember going to Dubai Mall and found Penhaligon's Endymion and fell in love with it. So this is the
Mm,
first fragrance I bought. I think I was 15 at the time, and I
mm,
still have a big fondness for it.
mm.
Um, but yeah, I didn't gravitate towards specific fragrances at the time. I didn't know anything about perfume really. I just went for whatever I kind of liked. Really, it was very intuitive, if that makes sense.
Mhm. No, it does make sense. It often is sort of this intuitive, sort of indescribable magnetism that we might have with fragrances. It's kind of hard to articulate. I think some of us might approach it in a more prosaic manner, based on what how we're influenced by other people who are fans of fragrance. But you know, I think that there is that sort of like, you just go with your sort of, your intuition, the intuition that just sort of guides you to what you love. So that's something that is, I think, relatable to many of us. So it started with those origins. Now, you have actually, since that time, studied perfume. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Absolutely. Basically, how I started was, like I said, when I lived in Dubai, after school, I would go to the souk. And at one point, I found this little shop, right? There was this
Mm-hmm.
little man working in a little shop with a lot of bottles, with so many labels, so many languages, so many colors. And I was absolutely fascinated with them. So I entered the shop and asked him what the bottles meant and asked him if I could smell this and that bottle.
Right,
And I
right.
did this for pretty much, I don't know, 3 to 6 weeks. I don't quite remember. And so for 3 to 6 weeks, I would always go to that place pretty much 3 times a week until finally he accepted my presence and told me to fetch him a bottle of tea rose oil, which,
Some
as you
tea
know, is,
fruits.
is, is quite rare, right?
It is. It's much less common than, say, of a Damascena rose. Yes.
Exactly. But at the time, I didn't know anything about Tuif rose or Damascena rose. I didn't know a thing about perfume.
Yeah.
So he asked me, to go fetch a Tuif rose bottle. So I went out to the next shop, asked for a Tuif rose bottle, a Tola, which
Mhm.
I bought. Came back to my guy and said, "Hey, here's your tea rose." And he told me, well, he didn't open the bottle, he just barely smelled it. And he said, "That's not tea rose, get me tea rose." So I went to
Mm.
another shop, bought another bottle, went back to my guy and told him, well, here's your tea rose bottle. And again, he said, well, that's not tea rose. I asked you for a tea rose.
Mm.
And then I spent an hour and a half going to most of the shops at the perfume souk until I found one that looked quite legitimate and asked them for a very legitimate Taif rose bottle. And I told them, I've been scammed before, I won't be scammed now, I really want a real Taif rose bottle. So they sold me pretty much the same thing for 10 times the price. I went to my guy and said, hey, here's your Taif rose bottle. He looked at it, said, this is not Taif rose. Then he pulled a drawer, pulled a bottle from it and said, this is a Taif rose. Smell that one, smell everything that you sent me, and tell me the difference. And that's how I got introduced to the world of fragrances,
Mm.
through that guy. And so for the next 3 to 5 years, he kept basically grooming me, right? He kept grooming me. He taught me really how to smell natural materials. He taught me the difference between a Java vetiver, a Haitian vetiver, an Indian
Mm.
vetiver. He had me go through the souk to eat different frankincense varieties because he told me that really the best way to know what variety of frankincense you're buying is to taste it. He had me taste different musks, different civets, and he groomed me literally for pretty much, yeah, let's say 4 years. So this is how I got into the world of fragrances, through natural materials, which is why right now I have a fondness for natural perfumes and natural
Mm.
materials.
Mm. Mm. So for folks who are tuned in, many of us in the perfume community who are fragrance enthusiasts don't realize that there are these nuances and textures and characteristics to any one single species of plant based on their provenance. So you have different chemotypes as well. So what Alexandra is, what you're explaining is, you can have something that is a Pelargonium graveolens, but depending upon its provenance or the chemotype, where it grows, how it grows, different conditions, so on and so forth, they can have different scent profiles. They can have different facets, and that goes with so many different essential oils. So for the folks who are tuned in, who may not be aware of the difference between a Taif rose and your standard Bulgarian rose or Damasceno rose. How would you describe to them what those primary differences are?
Between the two roses, you mean?
Right, between the two roses, yes. The oils.
Well, the thing with roses, which I realized through studying many GCs and many varieties, is that the higher rose grows, right, the less phenylethyl alcohol it has, and the more citronellol it has. So gravity acts on the smell of roses, right?
Yes.
So literally, when you look at a Taif rose, when you look at an Omani rose, they will have a very citrusy profile.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Right, because of that, the increased citronelle content, for example, rather than something
Exactly,
like
makes
the
it
phenyl.
more citrusy. So the Taif rose is absolutely is really just smells like actually geranium, I would say, right? And the difference between the roses really is dependent on the terroir, as we say in France,
Right,
as it would be with wine.
right.
But that's true for any other material. If you just look at frankincense in Oman, like when I see in so many websites, Omani frankincense here, Omani frankincense there, that doesn't mean anything, right?
No, it's true.
Because even in Oman, you have different varieties of frankincense depending on where they grow, how high they grow, what the humidity level is at the place where they grow when they're harvested, which is the beauty of naturals.
And that is just talking about, say, for example, just Boswellia sacra. And a lot of people don't realize that there's Boswellia serrata and Boswellia freriana and so on and so forth. There's all these different species. They're species essentially from the same Boswellia family, and there's such a diversity. It's like, when somebody says it smells like frankincense or it smells like an olibanum resin, it's not monolithic. It really depends on what resin. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No,
Fascinating.
but
Yeah.
exactly. There's this whole thing about frankincense right now at the moment in the perfume community,
Right.
and I keep saying that Omani frankincense doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Frankincense doesn't mean anything.
Right.
If you smell an essential oil of Boswellia occulta, it will smell like pear and iris. If you smell an essential oil of Boswellia peperifera, it will smell like bitter lemon and carrot seed.
Yeah. Sort of this musty carrot seed dry down. Yeah. For
Exactly.
sure.
If you smell a resin from Omani frankincense, let's say a dark Omani frankincense, it won't smell the same as a Hajari frankincense.
Right.
And that's the beauty of naturals, and that's the problem I feel with not the industry, but the way we teach people, the way we educate customers, is that everyone at the moment is always trying to say we want natural perfumes, but you don't want what comes with natural seed, right?
And I guess
Like when you go to wine. Yes,
I'm so sorry, Alex. And I was going to say, and it can come with some baggage, which is necessary and inevitable. But go ahead. Yes.
No, I was saying because I used to work in a wine cellar, and in France we love our wines, and when you go to a wine cellar, you know that, I don't know, if you want a bottle of Chateau Jouvent, it will be different every year. Every vintage will be different, and that's the same chateau. But if you look at different chateaus in the same region, they will all be different. And this is something that we know, and this is something that we like, and this is something that we seek. The problem is that we don't look at natural perfumes the same way, whereas we should, basically.
Right.
Because it is the same thing, right? And right now, when you look at the industry, when you look at the big groups, the big companies, no harm to them, and you know, they will they will do these communals. Maybe you know the word, right? Communals is when you take all different, you'll take different crops, basically, of tuberose and jasmine, and you will
Sort
put
of
them all together.
yeah, it's all these different sources into one. It happens with so many products. I mean, even olive oil. Yeah.
Exactly. So you'll
Right.
put them all
Yeah.
together, and I don't know, you'll be like, oh, okay, so that crop is a bit more indolic, and that crop is a bit more fruity. So we'll put less of the fruity one and more of the indolic one, so the
Mm,
profiles stay the same.
mm,
Which is what we do in champagne wines, actually. Moet de Chandon does
mm,
the
mm.
same with grapes. And I don't know where I'm going with that, to be honest. But yeah, sorry, I literally
No,
don't know
no,
where
no.
I'm going.
It's no, no, no. That's fine. That's fine. I think we can definitely go a number of different places with that. I think that one of the big concerns in the perfume community, as far as the other side of the table, perfumers and the like, is when there is marketing and ad copy that purports there to be certain materials. Um, but there's a question of accuracy and there's a question of transparency there. You know, a transparency as does this particular bergamot originate from Calabria? Does this particular um, I'm trying to think of another example. Um, labdanum from a certain, this actually is something I remember. I was reading an ad copy for a fragrance, and they said that the labdanum was from the Dominican Republic. And I was doing some research on that, and I could not find any evidence of labdanum being something that's grown in the Dominican Republic. So there's all of these attempts to exoticize and represent certain cultures and with maybe good intentions, maybe not so good intentions. And it can be a bit confusing, or it can sort of be deceptive to the consumer. I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on what you think of all of this, with the way that a lot of these perfumes are marketed, with the materials coming from these places and so on and so forth.
Well, one of the examples I like most is the example of patchouli, right?
Yeah.
Because you'll see in those copies most often patchouli being advertised as Indonesian patchouli, right?
Right.
Which is true.
Yeah.
It comes from Indonesia, but most patchouli, if not all patchouli, comes from Indonesia.
Right.
But I love the fact that you'll see in all those copies the fact that patchouli comes from Indonesian, as it was more exotic, as it was more rooted into some sort
Right.
of a tradition, right?
It's not your standard patchouli that's grown.
No, it's Indonesian. Well,
It's
yes, it is Indonesian. Literally, it's like saying I don't know, French champagne. There's nothing, you know.
right.
There's or American Concord grape. Yes, it is. It's
Yes.
naturally American, or it's naturally Indonesian. And because more and more people want this sort of natural argument, customers want this natural argument. Well, houses will try, and that's not their fault. I mean, that's what we want. But they'll try to advertise everything that they can,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I don't know anything about labdanum being grown in the Dominican Republic. Maybe there is labdanum being grown, in the Dominican Republic, or maybe there's labdanum being treated in the Dominican Republic, which is quite different, right?
Good point.
It's like the bourbon vetiver,
Mm-hmm.
right? I have a really personal feeling about this because my mum is from the Bourbon Island, the Reunion Island.
Oh, true. Oh,
Yes, and I've been there many times, and I can't suffer really to see in different websites and different houses a bourbon vetiver from Uruguay or a bourbon
okay.
vetiver from Madagascar, right?
Well, that.
And I'm like, well, no, it's not, and it's not a problem that it isn't, right? But don't say it's a bourbon vetiver when it's not a bourbon vetiver. But as long as, again,
Yeah, I think I recall seeing Haitian bourbon vetiver once and thinking to myself, what does that even mean? Why is it from bourbon or is it from Haiti?
It doesn't mean shit. Sorry, it doesn't mean fucking shit. And I'm like, but this is, and literally this is, I'm from, well, technically from the Bourbon Island. I've been there. I've seen farmers fighting,
Right.
to keep their crops, to make a living out of their vetiver and geranium crops.
Yes.
And then you see people being like, oh, this is a bourbon geranium from Tanzania.
Oh
Well,
goodness.
fucking not. It isn't. But
It's it,
no one will know the difference.
right.
That's the thing. As long as you don't educate the customers in the end, they won't know the difference. They'll be like, oh, it's a bourbon vetiver.
Seems rather
Oh, it
cynical of
sounds
them.
fancy, which it does. Oh, it is completely cynical.
It's
It is completely
relying
cynical.
on the ignorance and insulting the intelligence of the consumer, um, and just using very lazy and very sloppy ways to exoticize and make more luxuriant their product in such a dishonest way. And also, it's a slap in the face to, those who authentically grow said materials because they're not even being used. Really, it's really disappointing that this
No,
happened.
it is disappointing. I can't say that it is necessarily dishonest because when you say it's an Indonesian patchouli, it is.
Well, in that case, yes. But then, yeah.
The bourbon is another thing, and people will find loopholes telling you, oh, it's not from the Bourbon Island, but it's distilled in a Bourbon Island way, whatever.
Urban
Um,
style.
exactly, but in the end, I always say the consumer is the master.
Mm.
You know, as long as we buy into the narrative, however wrong or right it may be, we enable it
Mm-hmm.
and we feed it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it is dishonest. It's cynical more than the dishonest, really.
Right.
Because again, a house can't lie. If they say that there's a rose essential oil, there is rose essential oil. Now there is 0.1% of rose essential oil, but there is. Christophe Laudamiel speaks about it, speaks
We
about
actually,
this issue.
indeed, we
Um,
actually had a discussion with them on one of the previous live streams last year. We were talking about how they will put just a minuscule fraction just so that they can
exactly,
say that they use
0.1%
it.
exactly, so they can exactly. So they don't lie when they say there's 0.1% of rose essential oil or iris absolute. There is.
Right. But the thing is, you know, does it really make a difference to have such a minute amount? It is it you know, I know it's arguable and it depends on the material and the substantivity, the tenacity, the yes, it could very well make it like oak moss. Very small amount can do a lot. But I feel like with some of these materials, it's almost as if, they're putting it in just so they say they can, but there's a certain translucency to the material that it doesn't really make a difference because it will end up getting sort of dampened or muddled or hidden anyhow by everything else that ends up in the vinyl formula. So it's sort of silly.
No, but definitely, I've seen so many perfumes. I've been to so many launches where they were advocating the use of a certain material, and you couldn't smell it in the perfume.
Right.
But that was
Yeah.
the only thing they could talk about during the
Right.
presentation.
Yeah.
And when you would confront the perfumer or the brand owner about it, they would be quite upset.
Yeah.
Um, so again, it depends. In some formulas, I mean, like oak moss.
Mm-hmm.
In most cases, 0.1% of oak moss does make a difference
Mm-hmm. Yes.
because it's so strong. Even 0.1% of rose can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but in a lot of cases, it doesn't. It's
Right.
just there so you can sell the fact that you have a natural rose from Turkey or Bulgaria or a
Right.
natural vetiver from the Bourbon Island or natural Iris Absolute. Um, but yeah,
I think
It's all a
there
bit of a sham, mostly.
exactly, exactly. I think there's some beautiful interpretations of Orus that don't necessarily even need very much in the way of Orus absolute or Orus, concrete. Um, with all the many materials that are at the disposal of the perfumer. So it doesn't necessarily impress me more if they're, trying to pull the wool over my eyes. The worst are for materials because I've had a lot of experience, directly with materials myself. And there's some where I'm just a bloodhound and I'll just be able to pick it up right away in a perfume. And then others, and two of them, for example, are two of my favorite materials is ambret seed and angelica root. And there's so many instances where it claimed in the notes pyramid, in the ad copy, and everything, the marketing, that it's using it and it's not there. And I'm convinced it's not there. So, a reconstruction's there, an approximation of it through reconstruction, but they're not the actual material, because there's this certain sort of je ne sais quoi, like something that, like, I can just pick it up. It's just because it's such these natural materials are so complex. They have so many components in them, and they're unique to the plant that produces these materials, that anything that's a synthetic reproduction can approximate it, and sometimes very convincingly. Obviously, you know this, and many people who are tuned in. But there's that little tiny something that's like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about. It happens so much. It happens so much, and it's just. And then I read the ad copy, and we have the whole score, such and such from such and such, and it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
That's the thing. It is everywhere.
Yeah,
It is
yeah,
everywhere. The thing is, as long as if they don't claim to use an essence or an absolute, it means it's not there. Right?
yeah.
If you
Right.
see a Turkish rose or a Tunisian orange blossom, that doesn't mean anything legally, right?
Yeah. It's
Unless
up.
there's the
Yeah.
absolute or the essence, it doesn't
Right.
mean anything. That doesn't
Right.
mean that an accord can't be beautiful,
True. Yeah.
of course. Um, but yeah, I do see what you mean.
And it's fascinating because, for so many decades, modern perfumery didn't lean so heavily on that. And in fact, the consumer had very little knowledge unless they were quite nerdy about it. I suppose they could really get access to it sometimes if they were really digging deep. But for the most part, the average consumer really wasn't paying attention to that. And now what we have is that being front loaded into everything, especially, in the less mainstream, which we have such a huge fraction of the market now being non-mainstream. That the whole just narrative surrounds authenticity and the quest for that competitive market of authenticity. Who is more authentic than the other? I'm just going to turn it to the chat just very briefly because a couple of notes have just come through. Noah says, in the world of cigars, there is an Ecuadorian Connecticut wrapper leaf. It's the seed originally from Connecticut and mostly grown there, but transplanted to Ecuador. Is this something similar? Kind of sounds like it, I would say.
Um, I think it is relating to the bourbon vetiver.
Earlier, what we were discussing. Yeah,
So
yeah,
it would be similar, but then
yeah, yeah.
again, if you transplant a Boswellia sacra in Kenya, it won't smell the same.
Mm.
The same way that if you take a Merlot and you put it in Chile instead of Bordeaux, it won't
Hmm.
taste the same, because the terroir, the climate, and the land, they all have something to do with it, with the taste and with the smell, which is why I find it quite, not cynical, but hypocritical,
It
you know.
is. Yeah, yeah. We have a question from Floating Man. Is this guy related to Ariel Helwani?
I wouldn't know. Possibly.
Distant?
Possibly. I might be. I don't know. Maybe very distant. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't looked into my family tree, but we share the same name. We'll probably share the same ancestors, because I believe we all originate from the same region on
Mhm.
Earth. So it might be so, but not to my knowledge. No. And I'm sure I'm not a sportsman anyway.
Speaking of, I have gotten the occasional question, am I related to the hockey player Joe Colborne? And I just can
Are
only,
you?
perhaps distantly related. We just share a
Well,
name.
technically, if you share a name, I mean, I don't know that
That's the relation.
I don't know that Helwani is very common in the Middle East, but I do think that we may share an ancestor at some point. But I'm sure I'm not the boxing guy or whatever.
So I wanted to ask you, this should be fascinating to some of our viewers. What are some of your most beloved natural materials
Oh,
in perfume?
well, as you said, you actually mentioned one. I would say ambrette.
Yeah, that's one of mine as well. Yeah.
I would say ambrette because it is, to me, it is still undescribable.
Mm.
Really. I mean, I work with it, I use it, I've used it in literally all my perfumes, but I still cannot describe it. And that's what I love about it.
Mm.
Ambrette would be, it's a mystery to me. The effect that it can have on a formula, the smell itself, and that's what I like about perfume, the mystery, the part that you can't reach, that you can't understand, right?
Mm.
So yeah, that would be ambrette. I do love osmanthus, I do love iris,
Mm.
I do love frankincense,
Mm.
obviously.
Me too. Yes.
But you know, these are materials you can wrap your head around. But ambrette, and this is really personal, is impossible to enter.
Mm.
It just escapes you, it eludes you in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
It is woody, it is fruity, it gives so much lift to a fragrance. It's
And
impossible.
it's amazing the kind of companionships, if you will, that it can create with other elements in a composition too. These companionships, the way it merges, and it's just hard to describe. It has just this shape-shifting kind of quality to it to me. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. And fascinating that it's one out of few plants that produces this musk
The musk,
compound.
yes.
Yeah, love it. And that's
I
probably
mean,
why I'm a fan of Angelica root as well.
I was about to say
Yeah,
I do
yeah,
love Angelica root, but
right.
Angelica root is easier to describe. But ambrette,
It is, yeah.
typically, I've created perfumes where I've put possibly 0.05% of ambrette, and it made a huge difference.
Isn't that fascinating?
And even my manufacturers were like, "This is very expensive, actually. Do you really want to add it in?" And I was like, "Yeah, because it does make a difference, even though the formula is completely natural, etc." 0.05% of ambrette makes a huge difference in a formula,
Mm-hmm.
whether you can or can't smell it.
Right, right.
It's not that powerful, but it like you say, it has a symbiotic nature
Mm-hmm.
that
It's
is that I found absolutely fascinating.
it's that end result, the end result that just sort of colors it in such a almost bewildering way. How this
Exactly.
material can do that, can sort of mold whatever it's accompanying in a composition. Just one of the most beautiful materials. So expensive and such just fascinating. And I've dabbled with the essential oil, the absolute, and interesting what certain qualities kind of come to the fore in either one of them. Very nice, very nice. And then of
And the
course,
two are different. The two are completely
yeah,
different.
they are. Yeah, there's other things that are far more prominent in one than in the other. The fruitiness is more apparent to me in the essential oil,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
yeah, the nutty woodiness in the absolute. There used to be a seller of natural materials, White Lotus Aromatics, here in the States.
Yes, yes. Oh, yes, I do remember.
Such great materials that they that they offered to the perfumer, and that's where I would purchase it. And yeah, and also such fragile material too. It's so easy for it to spoil if you don't store it properly. But
Yeah, no,
just
definitely.
um, what about as far as the florals? What are the florals that most captivate you?
Osmanthus does captivate me.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm a sucker for Osmanthus.
Hmm.
Sorry, there's a car coming by. Might be a bit
Okay.
noisy.
Well, I can give my comment on osmanthus. It's a lot of people argue that the absolute of osmanthus doesn't really resemble the flower, but to me, I can recognize it as coming from the flower. It just seems like, as it is, a distillation. It just I still read it as such, but it is sort of this concentration or distillation of it. Sort of if you were to take something that was very sheer and then you just press it all together and mold it and concentrate it. And it just has these very fascinating leathery qualities, and of course the fruity qualities everybody talks about. Everybody mentions the apricot, but I feel like sometimes I feel like that's sort of like a lazy description for it, because it's just so much more than that. There's just
No, definitely.
so much more going on, like almost like that like pollinous. I don't even
Absolutely.
pollen, yeast, not an off-putting yeast, obviously, but very interesting sort of things going on in the absolute. Yeah, that is a great one. One other one that I really like a great deal is Cassie Absolute, the acacia, that as opposed to mimosa, which I love as well. But Cassie, what a complex material to come from a flower. I
No,
love it.
to be honest, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. Yeah,
No, I was about to say that, to be honest, I do prefer Cassis to Mimosa.
yeah. No, I
I do
would
like
I
the
would
greenness of Cassis. I do like the leatheriness of Cassis.
and
Um,
an
um,
animalic kind of element to it too. The
yes,
undertones of it. Yeah,
definitely.
so
And
crazy.
it's quite underrated, to be honest,
Mm, mm.
as opposed to many other florals.
And for those who are familiar with Un Fleur de Cassis from Frederick Malle, as somebody who's very familiar with the Cassis Absolute, there is a lot of it in that. It's like you can be assured that there is Cassis in it, and that's what makes it just so fascinating and beautiful and peculiar. Um, yeah, yeah. So we were going to touch upon a little bit of the concept of scarcity in materials, and the issues that poses, and maybe the economy of that. um are you finding right now as a perfumer that there are some materials right now that are much more difficult to obtain, and it may be more difficult for you to incorporate them into your work because of whatever conditions, whether it's cost or restrictions?
Well, to be honest, I'm I am quite lucky. I am quite lucky because um, I can pretty much do what I want,
Hmm.
right? My manufacturer is really, really open to me, um, 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 let's say, bringing in new materials.
That's great.
Just no matter how I source it, as
Mhm.
long as I can produce a safety data sheet, he'll be like, "Give it to me."
Mm, mm.
Um, so I never had this problem. The matter of cost isn't a problem either, because my clients and the projects that I take on projects that make money. Really, to be honest,
Mm, mhm.
I pretty much almost lose money on all my projects, or projects. Sorry, so money isn't an issue. Um, but I can see scarcity. The problem is scarcity in the sense that the perfume that I did for the Odyssey, Perfume, for instance,
Mhm.
we produced 5 kilograms of concentrate to begin with. And my manufacturer told me, do you plan on making more? Because a lot of the materials present in the formula are very difficult to
Mhm.
source, and we don't know that we might secure more of them for, let's say, 10, 15, or 20 kilograms.
Mhm.
So it's not a matter of cost. It is actually, it's a matter of resource, and it also is a matter of cost, because when a material is very costly, and the houses, let's say Bioland, etc., will produce less of them,
Mhm. Mhm.
so they'll be even more costly. But the less demand there is, the less material there is available,
Mm.
until there is no material available anymore, which is what
Mm.
happened with Fleuve. Fleuve is very difficult to find. Melilot is
Yeah.
very difficult to find,
Right.
right?
Right.
I had to use Melilot in the Odyssey perfume, but I
Mm.
couldn't, because it's nearly impossible to source.
Mm.
And it's not a matter of if, right? It's just a matter of, well, nobody's asking for it anymore, so nobody's producing it
Mhm.
anymore.
Mhm. Right. That makes sense.
That's where I see the scarcity myself.
Mhm. And so for those who are tuned in or watching the archive, Melilot or Melilotus, a Latin name, clover. It is a type of clover
Yes.
species. And Fleuve is a beautiful material. Fleuve kind of is in a vicinity somewhat similar to like Leatrix or something Kumarinic like, but it's unique though. It's not. It has a certain sort of agrestic quality that you don't really find in some of the other Kumarinic hay-like materials. I have some of it, and it's just beautiful, beautiful stuff. But I have noticed that it doesn't really. It's the availability is next to non-existent, which is a shame. I think that perfumers could stand to do some creative things with it. Another one I was thinking of, not necessarily in the same vicinity, but also very uncommon, is like cascarilla, like yeah,
Definitely.
which
It's
is very
absolutely wonderful, but the
unique.
only perfume I've smelt it in lately was Audisiac by Sulmanteau.
It wasn't that Natalie
Yes, exactly.
Cosplayer, yeah. Hmm.
Yes, and she actually had to, uh, 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 she kind of forced her producer to register it again, because it's so rarely used,
Yeah.
right? That the producers, the manufacturers, basically were like, well, nobody's going to use it but you, so no, we're not going to put it in our Cardex, which is the catalog of materials that a perfumer can use with
Mm,
the house they work in. And Natalie had to force their manufacturer to use Cascarilla again
mm,
for this
mm,
specific project.
mhm, mhm.
And basically, the reason why it's not used anymore is because people just stopped using it because of cost, because of IFRA limitations, etc.
Mm.
So it just fell out of practice. And then basically, yeah, I mean, you won't register one material for 5 kilos every 10 years. I mean, that's the industry.
Yeah, yeah. But it could, I could see it doing so many great things, even in, with a small percentage, what it can do. I had a very small amount from Hermitage oils, and I think it was the only place where I could find the opportunity to purchase it in a small volume, and I just was in love with it, and I just never saw it coming up. I think when I did some of my research, there was a fragrance. I think it was a Maître Parfumeur Gantier, Cascarille, late 70s, early 80s. There was, now perhaps that was a time where it was more available. And then I saw that particular one that we're discussing, and I smelled it, and I'm like, oh, this is exciting. It's actually a final product that uses it. And I was able to pick it up with my nose, and it's a great work. It's a great work, but it's just one of those, it's one of those obscurities. It's a real obscurity. And then there are also materials where, they are possible carcinogens, and then they're just banned. And then I wonder if it's really, if they really needed to be banned. There's a few of those, like One of my favorites, calamus, the acerone, beta acerone and calamus. That's one very unique material. It doesn't smell like anything else that a plant produces at all. And unfortunately, it's not easy to, I don't even think it's easy to reconstruct because it's just so complex.
Well, the thing is, calamus isn't banned per se.
That's
Like
true. Does it
I've
have to
used it.
have, yeah, do you have to have it without the beta acerone? Is that available now?
It is. I've used it in Personne, for instance,
Oh,
because
you
the Odyssey. Yes, the Odyssey literally mentioned calamus,
yeah.
so I had to use it. So it has to have a certain amount of beta azarone in it.
Mm.
Basically, the more beta azarone it has, the less you can use, right? So it's not banned, but because the ban on beta azarone is so strict, well, you can use less and less and less and less and less of it. The good thing is, calamus is very strong.
Oh yeah, it would cancel
It's
out everything if you use
absolutely
too much.
strong.
Yeah, yeah. So it's
It's
little goes a long way. Yeah.
it's like for oak moss. Oak moss was never banned. You can still use oak moss, even
Right.
oak moss with atronol.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you don't need that much oak moss in a perfume, right?
No, no.
Even just 1% to me would be huge.
Oh,
It would be
powerful.
huge.
Like aggressive at 1% for sure. I tell, there's a lot of vintage fragrance enthusiasts. I'm sure you've heard the conversations about the loss of oak moss and perfumery and how they remember the good old days where 5% oak moss was used. And I'd have to correct them and say, I don't think that had ever been the case because it's extremely strong material. That would, if you were to do that in a composition, it would just collapse everything else and just be just oak moss with maybe a suggestion of anything else that it drowned out. But that's the sort of the legend that has been created about oak moss. I mean, you see it on forums and message boards and YouTube videos, reviews that this is a shell of its former self because of the oak moss ban. This has changed because it doesn't have as much oak moss. And I think in some cases, if it's a fragrance where there isn't really much respect towards it because it isn't really a big seller to begin with, they don't really try to compensate. And I think it has more to do with that than the actual restrictions to oak moss, because there's just incredible fragrances that are still in production. To me, I immediately pick up there's oak moss, that it's still there and it still can function. But isn't that fascinating how it's almost like they become, some of these materials that become more legendary and more sort of I'm trying to find the right word for it. It's there's an embellishment of it, so that there's this belief that the perfume industry has been ruined because of these restrictions, and I just think that's patently false.
No, when I was just starting, I didn't have my software with IFRA and everything. And I was working a formula, and I went to see a perfumer, and she's a teacher and everything. And I don't remember quite which material I asked her about. But I went to her and said, hey, do you know what's the IFRA limit on that specific material? And she answered, well, that doesn't matter because the material is so expensive that you wouldn't put, you wouldn't
You would be able
wouldn't
to
go out
afford.
the IFRA limit.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I keep saying to everybody, that the IFRA limit is the least of your problems when you work
Right.
a formula. The first limit is the price,
Right.
right?
It's true.
Like Personne. I mean, Personne, I keep talking about it because to me it's a good case, right? The formula of Personne is absolutely expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if we had to release it with the same margins that are right now in the industry,
Mm-hmm.
the perfume should cost, for 50 ml, it should probably cost 800 euros. If we followed the same margins, because the formula is that expensive.
Wow.
Again, it's full natural perfumes. There are 102 naturals in the formula. I didn't even look at the IFRA when I was doing the formula. I did the formula, finished the perfume, the brand accepted it. I sent it to my lab and I told them, is it IFRA at 15%? And they were like, yeah. I didn't even care about the IFRA, even though I had calamus, even though I had oak moss, even though I had myrrh, even though I had nutmeg, all of those material, which are quite restricted.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but I didn't even care about this because the actual limit is the price.
Mm-hmm.
The first limit that you find in the industry is always the price. The number of actually banned materials, prohibited materials, and molecules is quite small. I mean, of course, I honestly, I love Costus. I absolutely love
Oh, me
Costus.
too. I know. I'm
And
actually, my next video will be on Costus. I'm doing a whole video on it. Yeah.
and this is a material which I absolutely adore and love, and I feel that it's a shame that we literally prohibited this, right? So when I hear all the talk around oak moss, I'm like, guys, this talk should be more about Costus, because we
Right.
can still use oak moss, and we've never used oak moss in the same way that we have Costus, in a way, in terms of impact, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And we still can use oak moss with and without atronol, whereas
Yes.
we can't use Costus anymore. So
Right.
there is a real difference there.
Yeah.
And I don't see anyone talking about Costus
Because
at
some
all.
some folks are mistaking the Costus for oak moss because they don't really know what they're smelling. It's true. I mean,
Probably, I don't
you
know.
have, you have some YouTubers who have 10,000 subscribers and they're going on and on about how they smell this and they smell that, and I'm convinced that they think they're smelling one thing, then they're actually smelling another. And I think Costus might be one of them. And then even some of the replacers have gotten discontinued. The to even replace the Costus has been challenging. I know one of them was discontinued; they stopped producing it. Costasol. It's a hard one to. It's hard to replicate that. Really difficult, and then you have to rely on
It is.
bases.
No, it's quite impossible to replicate a
Right?
Costus, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I see all this talk about the IFRA this and the IFRA that, I mean, of course, I myself, when I look at my formulas and I see the IFRA limit, I'm like, come on. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I would like to put a bit more of that material, and I know that nobody will die, because no one has ever died from 1% oak
No.
moss, or 1 to many percent of saffron.
Right.
So yeah,
Right. And
but
the thing that is so
still,
laughable, it's so laughable
still,
how the food that we eat is more likely to be carcinogenic. There's so many other things that we use and that we're exposed to in our day-to-day lives that might be more possible. I mean, we're only applying perfume topically, and then there are other things that we're exposing our bodies to. Obviously we can't ban MRIs. We can't ban this medical equipment that's necessary to keep people alive, you know exposure to radiation. So it's a bit extreme. But that being said, I think it is good that we point out that in spite of restrictions, many of it's overblown. Many, and save for maybe a handful of materials where it's like, well, that's a bummer, we have to kind of compensate for that.
no, exactly, that's
Yeah.
the thing. If someone tells me, oh, well, it's such a shame that this perfume doesn't have muscatone
Yeah.
or Costus,
Yeah.
then I will say, yes, indeed,
Yeah.
it is a shame.
Yeah.
But I also understand, to some extent, why they're no longer here, why they're no longer allowed in a fragrance.
Right.
As much as we can literally blame the IFRA and all the regulations, it's still a good thing
Yeah.
that it is so heavily regulated, because
Right.
You know, I remember in the 70s, people were used to saying that, during summer you can wear perfume, you know,
That's
because of the furocoumarins in the bergamots,
oh
etc.
right.
So
Oh
if you
yes,
used to wear
because of
perfume
it being
during the summer, you'd
right.
actually get rashes,
Right.
which is something that can't happen anymore because you don't have furocoumarins anymore, basically
Yeah.
in levels that are so minute that it wouldn't
Right.
create a problem, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so so yeah, to me, this whole IFRA thing is, like you said, overblown because again, the first limit is the
Yeah.
price, literally,
And just for the viewers and
literally.
for those who are watching, furocoumarins, for example, bergaptine and bergamot. There's others and other citrus oils, other spice oils. Um, they are skin sensitizers. When there's exposure to sunlight, they can cause discoloration and irritation, permanent in some cases. So that's what we were just referring to. And but yeah, with bergamot, almost all of it is bergaptine free.
Free, yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So yeah. So
Exactly, that's the thing.
Alex, we're going to take just a really quick intermission, and we'll bring both of us back in just a minute. I'll see you in a bit.
Perfect.
Okay, and you have been tuning into Effluvium with me and my guest Alexandre Helwani, and we've been having a really great discussion on primarily on natural perfume materials, which has been great. We have 6 people tuned in. It's a little bit less than usual, but that's understandable. This is an unusual time for the Effluvium live stream. I hope that many of you are enjoying this in its archived form. Just want to remind folks, if you want to support this content, to please consider buying me a coffee. Each are $5. If you buy 6 cups, you will get a generous sample pack from my collection of many, many samples of all different types of fragrances. I get sent a lot of them. I receive a lot of them. I want to try everything that I can possibly handle, but I do want to let go of some of it and have other people enjoy some things. So 6 cups will get you a sample pack. Unfortunately for that shipment, it's US only, please, at this time. Otherwise, if you just want to send me 1 or 2 coffees, anything helps. That's buymeacoffee.com/Joseph Cold P. And we're going to get back to this discussion. We're going to bring Alex back in. Hi. And welcome back. We have you on mute at the moment.
Hello.
Hello. So why don't we move into this? Are you taking an order?
Yes.
I love it. It's awesome. I kind of wish I was hanging out where you are. I see some distilled beverages behind you. I see some bottles.
I mean, a perfumer is an alembic in a way.
So why don't we move into the second hour and discuss the other topic that I suggested, and this is fragrance and spirituality and fragrance and ritual. So some of us might look to religion as a form of spirituality, or we might look to other forms of practice, and how scent might factor into that. And I thought that you'd be a great person to talk about that with, given your knowledge. So tell me, is it possible? Is it possible to? Somebody else is vying for your attention right now.
No, So that they were literally talking literally opposite me. I just told them to move a bit.
So let's talk about.
Like there's a whole
I
square,
love it.
and they literally
That's pretty.
opposite me. Anyways,
So fragrance and spirituality. Do you think that the average perfume / fragrance wearer can have a spiritual moment with even something that is that is in the conventional market? Do you think that's a possibility?
no.
You
And
heard it
that's
from the horse's mouth
the
right
end
there,
of it.
folks. And tell us
No,
why. Tell us your thoughts behind that.
because I think that right now there's so much talk about perfume being spiritual, this and that,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
true. That's the origins of perfumery.
Right,
But
right.
the way we actually create perfumes has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with spirituality.
Mm-hmm. Right,
Nothing.
right.
You can't.
Yeah.
You couldn't say that a Prada or a Tom Ford could be spiritual.
No, I would find it hard to keep a straight face if I were to consider that. Right.
You know, you
Yeah.
can say whatever you want about there being myrrh and frankincense or whatever. It wouldn't be spiritual because it wasn't created to be spiritual
No,
or
no.
to be used in a spiritual way,
Right, right, right.
right? So to me, again, the shift has to happen with the consumers.
Yeah.
Unless we see perfume as something more than just a cosmetic, an
Mm,
accessory that we put on,
mm,
there won't be a shift.
mhm,
Again, the consumer is king here.
mhm, mm.
If we keep buying perfumes only so that they smell good and that we smell good and that we have, you know, whatever clout we can,
Mhm.
keep saying Star Wars. Um, welcome to Paris. Look at him, for fuck's sake.
Hi.
Anyway,
Hi there. Hi. Oh goodness. So affectionate.
welcome. He is. He really is. So, so yeah. Unless we use perfume in a spiritual way,
Mhm.
we won't be sold spiritual perfumes.
Right.
They're not created as such. They're
No.
not sold as such
No.
anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've moved so far away from the first purpose of perfume.
Mhm.
And this
Mm.
is what I advocate for. This is what I talk about in my articles, in my intervention, my conferences, in Institut Monarab, and wherever. I'm telling everybody, try to look at perfume in another way. Try to just expand, your vision of perfumery. To
Mm.
use perfume not just an accessory to be beautiful, but as something that connects with your deeper soul, because it can do
Mm.
that, because that's the point of it,
Mhm.
right?
I
But
recall
if you
when
don't,
I oh, I'm sorry. The delay in the time, sorry. I was going to say I recall, my mother passed away in 2014, and, of course, when you lose a parent, it just completely rocks your foundations. This one constant in your life, and, it's hard for anyone to process that. So I had a very difficult time, with my mental health after that, and I recall I started to meditate. And I used frankincense oil and I used an amber, and it served no purpose. I wasn't trying to attract anyone. I wasn't trying to there was nothing. The validation thing had no part of it. I didn't even see it as a perfume. I saw it as a ritual, sort of to kind of get me grounded again, to get me back into focus, to kind of help me go through that grieving process. And to me, that felt more spiritual, because I was just connecting with these bare materials as they were on my skin. And as much as I love perfume, and I'm writing about Avon fragrances, I'm writing about drugstore fragrances, it all brings me such great joy. But when it comes down to really having that intimate spirituality or exposing that rawness, it really comes down to these botanical materials. It really does. There's just something about it. And I think that there are, some commercial fragrances that can come close to that because of the intention of the perfumer, but it's really more the exception than the rule. More indie perfumers, but yeah. But I agree with you for the most part. You're not that from something that is, a conventional fragrance. Not a Chanel, not even Chanel, even though some people might feel like they're having a spiritual awakening with Chanel's. Not even that. I don't even think so.
But I'll say that the use makes the end, right? If you look at voodoo rituals,
Yeah.
I find it interesting that a lot of voodoo rituals use what's the name of them? LT Piver perfumes,
Mm,
right? De Rêve d'Or and de Héliotrope Blanc, etc. They weren't created for voodoo rituals.
mm-hmm.
These perfumes, this
Mm,
19th, end of 19th, late 19th, early 20th century perfumes. They weren't created for voodoo rituals or spiritual rituals, but yet they found themselves used in voodoo rituals, so they became spiritual
there you go.
for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And of course, Rêve d'Or, which means golden dream.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at voodoo rituals, Rêve d'Or, pardon me, you'll
Well,
have
isn't that
people
partly
literally,
why Piver still makes Rêve d'Or just for that? I think because of that market.
literally, absolutely,
Yeah.
because you'll go to the Middle East, you'll go to Haiti, you'll go to Louisiana, you'll go to Western Africa, you'll go to some shops in Paris, and you'll find usually women who will buy cases, literally cases of Rêve d'Or for rituals. And they
Yeah.
will literally pour entire bottles in a bath and literally take a bath because Rêve d'Or, which means golden dream, is supposed to give you a certain sense of divination or help you with divination rituals, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't
Yeah.
meant for it, but it is still used for it, which I find interesting, which is why I say that unless we use perfume and see perfume as a spiritual tool, it won't be.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you do, you can literally make not necessarily a Prada Noir or a Ombre Noir, whatever. But then again, I mean, if a Rêve d'Or can be used in a spiritual ritual, everything can.
Mm. My personal choice would be Royal Band de Caron. I think that was its original purpose, was to be,
Yeah,
but I could get spiritual with that if I had enough of it. It's affordable enough too. With the Rêve d'Or is very affordable. I purchased a bottle of it just
completely.
because of its origins. It smells quite nice, actually. I mean, it's a very,
Completely.
very efficiently made, and it does something very interesting. I should write something on it. I'll definitely give you a hat tip for sure. But I
Definitely.
have,
Please
yeah, I
do.
have a few of these, the really affordable splashes, so the Pivet splashes. It'd be nice to kind of muse upon them a little bit. But yeah, that's a very, very fascinating stuff. I think was Florida water another one that would be used. I think there was another one called Florida water. I'm not sure.
Yes.
I've seen those in like sort of the cult
Yes.
shops. They'll have Florida water as well. Yeah, it's not something. Yeah,
Yes.
but
So
yeah.
no, but yeah, I mean, it's the origin of perfumery.
Mm-hmm.
The point of perfume is to connect you with something that doesn't exist.
Mm,
And nowadays we're all obsessed with sillage.
yeah,
You know, we all want to
interesting.
have a perfume that lasts for ages. We all want a perfume that will literally fill an entire room as soon as you enter it. which
In that
literally
room,
ties
I
back.
will exit.
Yeah,
It is
exactly.
that room
But
that I will exit because I don't want to be fumigated. And oh my goodness, sorry to interrupt, but I can't. What they want, I run away from. I run away from it.
me too. Okay, me too. But still, um, when I see people wanting very long-lasting, very powerful perfumes, to me it ties back to the origins of perfumery.
Yeah.
The point of perfume, the meaning of the word is perfumum, through the smoke, that which exists through smoke and after the smoke.
Mm.
That's the point. You know, you'd burn an incense, you'd see the smoke, but 3 hours after you'd left your temple, you would come back and still smell the fragrance, which were supposed to tell you that something was there that you couldn't see. You couldn't see it
Mm.
through smoke, but you could still smell it. You couldn't
Mm-hmm.
touch it, you couldn't hear it, but you could smell it. And that was the entire point of perfume.
Mm.
So I find it interesting nowadays that we have people here wanting long lasting fragrances, wanting perfumes that have such a huge sillage in a very vain way.
Very vain. Yes.
It's completely vain, but it completely ties back to the origins of perfumery, which are to manifest something which you can't touch or hear or see.
Mm.
And when you talk about your late mother, peace be upon her, I think about the power of perfumery and perfume.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
You have so many. I've lost my best friend 2 years ago, and he used to wear vetiver de Guerlain.
Mm.
And the thing is, whenever I smell it on the streets, instantly I
Mm.
feel like he's there.
Mm-hmm.
I can hear his voice, I can see his clothes, I can literally feel his presence filling the actual space. And that's the beauty of it.
Mm.
That's where perfume is spiritual, no matter how natural or unnatural it is.
Yeah, that's the reason
It,
why I have a few of the fragrances that my mother wore as well. They're almost like too sacred for me to even write a review about them or to even.
mm,
I did a post and I devoted it to my mother last December because it was her birthday. But there's something that it's they're reserved. There's like a
mm.
special. They're just too hallowed for me because they're just so much my mom. Like I can't even
I
really
completely
wear them
understand.
because it's like almost too much to bear. And even other fragrances can take me back to a certain time where maybe it was like I don't have signature fragrances now because I have turned into that absolute nutter who I'm always wanting to smell different things. But when I was younger, I had more fragrances that I would wear consistently for weeks and months. And I recently wrote a review on Comme des Garçons Incense Kyoto.
Yeah.
And I I started wearing that because of a chance encounter with someone that I had spent time with. But because that was within the context of a very turbulent time in my life, even though that fragrance brought me much joy then, I would have a difficult time revisiting it because once again, just that very strong connection to the hippocampus. I would go right back to that time, and all of these difficult to process things would come up. So maybe when I'm 55, I can, but right now in my life, I don't want to wear it or smell it, or at least like actively look for it or smell it. Um, it's meant for that time for now, and
That
that's what my
reminds
review consisted of. Yeah.
no, that reminds me of a woman whom I had talked to years ago, and we were talking about perfume, and she told me she hated vetiver, completely
Yeah.
hated vetiver.
Yeah.
She wasn't a perfumer, she wasn't a connoisseur,
Mm-hmm.
But I can swear to you, Joseph, she had a thing for vetiver. She could smell 0.1% of vetiver in
Isn't that
any
something?
fragrance.
Yeah.
And at one point, we kept seeing each other, and I just told her, "What's your deal? Why do you hate it so much?"
Yeah.
And she couldn't tell me. She just said, "I don't know. I hate it." And she had a bionic nose for vetiver. Like, she literally could smell it better than any perfumer. And we kept seeing each other, and she really wanted to find her perfume, so I was trying to advise her. And so we would see each other many times throughout the year. And at one point, we sat down, and she told me, "Alexandre, I think I know." And I asked, "What do you know?" And she said, "I know why I don't like vetiver." And I said, "Then why don't you?" And she told me, "Well, actually, my husband used to wear the same fragrance, and he wore the same fragrance
Mm.
for 30 years of marriage.
Mm.
But when we decided to divorce, for the last 2 months of our divorce settlement, before it was actually settled, he
Mm.
changed fragrances and he wore Vetiver by Carven." So
Mm.
she had associated for the 2 months in her life, which are nothing. 2 months in her
Right.
life, 2 months in her marriage, they're nothing. But for the 2 last months, this man had worn Vetiver by Carven, and she associated vetiver with that moment in time. She had
Mm-hmm.
completely forgotten about it and hated it.
Mm.
That's the power of fragrance.
That is. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, and I think about I think about some of the fragrances I have a very difficult time smelling, and of course, in conversations with other fragrance enthusiasts, well, oh, isn't that disappointing? It's such a classic. But the only way that I can describe it is because it was a certain person who I had very unpleasant experiences with. And it's no slight at the perfume or the fragrance itself. It's just that that's just how powerful the associations can be. Even like when I was in high school and I used to wear Dracar Noir, and people think, oh, it's a given. He must love Dracar Noir because I have a sweet spot for a lot of those masculine fragrances from that time period. But there's something about that particular one that's tough for me because I was a very unhappy adolescent, and I just want to kind of leave that there. I just There are others that are so similar to it, that are like so similar, that I can handle, but if it's exactly Dracar Noir, it just hits my receptors a certain way. They go to those neurons in my brain and they say, no, I don't really feel like
Yeah,
revisiting
no,
that.
you know, I get that because, I had told you about Endymion,
Yeah.
which was the first perfume I bought when I was in high school. And when I was in high school was the moment when I entered depression.
Mm.
I went to a very deep, dark depression. And I was wearing Endymion at the
Mm-hmm.
time. And this depression lasted maybe 4 to 5 years. It was really rough. And every time I smelled Endymion since, I would literally have a feeling of self-loathing and absolutely, I would detest the entire world
Mm.
because it brought me back to that moment.
Right.
Now
Yeah.
I can smell Endymion and I do actually like it.
That's good that
Um,
you cut. Yeah, that's good that you could. I think it's the same. Eventually, I'll be able to.
Eventually, but I
Eventually.
haven't smelt it. I hadn't smelt it for pretty much 10 years
Yeah.
because I knew what it would bring out in me. And I smelt it, I think it was a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the Printemps and went to Penelagons and I talked to the sales assistant, beauty assistant, whatever. And told her I used to wear Endymion, and I smelt it again, and I was dreading, the moment when I would put the blotter to my nose, and I liked it. And I thought to
Oh,
myself,
good.
I told myself, oh, I've grown. I've outgrown that period. Now I can smell it and like it, which tells me something of me. And again, that's the beauty, the ineffable beauty of perfume,
Mm.
that it tells you things about yourself that can't be worded.
Well, it's almost like being able to hug your younger self and say you're okay. And if one
Definitely.
goes through a form of therapy and you're looking at, your younger self and how much, trauma, and then you're showing compassion towards that younger self, which kind of makes me think that, I really hadn't given a good sniff to Drakkar Noir in a long time, that perhaps I should, and maybe I am ready for it. Yeah, and Calvin Klein obsession
That's
as
the
well.
thing.
Yeah, I have another Alex here. We have
That's where perfume is.
Alex, the
Oh,
Perfume Temple is here, saying good evening. Just wanted to
hello.
highlight that.
Good
Yes,
evening.
good evening.
This-
Yeah. Well, perfume is therapy too. I think it can be therapeutic. I think that
Definitely.
therapeutic in the sense of, I mean, it can be quite the opposite as well, but that's another story for another time. But to be therapeutic
No,
and to
but
turn to it.
the beauty of perfume is that again it touches ineffable truths about yourself and your life,
Mm,
right? Truths that you have locked up for so long.
right.
I've had people smell perfumes and fall into tears and open up because they were reminded of something they had completely willingly or subconsciously forgotten about.
Mm,
And just smelling a certain scent just brought everything back up. That's the
hmm
beauty of it. And that's why perfume is inherently spiritual, whether you want it or not, whether it's synthetic or not.
Right.
It is spiritual because it is linked to your deeper reptilian almost appreciation of living,
Mm.
not of life, but of living, of the actual act of living and going through everything. I'm sorry, I'm getting carried away because I've had too
No,
many glasses of wine.
no, I'm envious actually. I don't have any. Don't have any here to indulge in myself. Um, One thing that I often consider in my relationship to scent and all of the smelling and all of the stimulation from it is, in a way, on sort of more of a maybe a headier, more abstract level. It reminds me of the way things used to be, and I don't mean in a sort of like rose-colored glasses, things used to be better kind of thing, but it reminds me of this of more the wonder and simplicity of childhood and youth, and that kind of curiosity where you're not necessarily jaded and desensitized. It's kind of like you're sensitized into to paying attention to these little details, and it kind of like it opens up wonder. And I know that might sound corny to some people, that's their problem. But to me, that wonder is kept alive. And I think that's so important in a time where things have a tendency to get very um, oppressively almost complicated. And, you know, it's like this quote. So we have a very respected man here in the States who passed away some time ago, who had this great television program for children, Fred Rogers. His show was called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. and he's almost like almost has a sainthood because he was just such a altruistic person and in just an earnest way. But he said that I appreciate more, and I want to try to get the quote correctly. Actually, I think I might want to look it up because I don't want to. I don't want to disgrace his memory. It's a great quote, though, and I often think of this quote when I'm pondering fragrance. And I'm bringing it up right now. Just bear with me. And there's dancing in the background. Of course, I missed that because I'm looking at my phone here. Okay, here it is. Life is deep and simple, and what our society gives us is shallow and complicated. And what I think fragrance does for me is it brings me back to the deep and simple. Much like the spirited little dances behind you are very deep and simple. I'm trying to have such a profound moment here.
I know.
The timing is impeccable. My God. It added to it. It almost is as if they were in an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
I've never seen Mr. Rogers, but this was impeccable, as you said.
Now you must.
But no, really.
Life is deep and simple, and what our society gives us is shallow and complicated. Yeah.
And indeed, yes. Yes, fragrance is deep and simple.
Yeah. I mean, of course, we can describe them as complicated and complex and all that jazz, but just go with me here.
No, but really, it reminds me of a writer whose name I've forgotten. She was a woman. I think she was blind and deaf.
Helen Keller?
Yes, exactly, Helen Keller.
Yes.
Sorry, and she talked quite a few times about fragrances, about the way she would recognize people through fragrances. And for some reason, it makes me think of that. It's deep and simple. The fact that a woman, blind and deaf, could be able to recognize and imagine the entire life and inner empire of somebody just through their fragrance. It's quite incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just to can you imagine living a life where you can only smell people,
yes.
and upon smelling them, without hearing them because she couldn't,
Right.
without seeing them because she couldn't,
yeah.
They would just come into a room, and she knew who they were because she knew what that smell, their scent more than their smell, talked about. She knew the depth of what that scent was saying. They would come into a room. I remember a passage, I couldn't quote it, but I remember of a passage where she said someone had come into a room and she knew who that was. And because that particular scent spoke of all their life, what they had been through during the day, what they had been through during their life, what they had been through during the entire thing. And I found it absolutely incredible.
To think how
absolutely marvelous,
profoundly attuned that sense of smell must be. That she could pick up on these textures and details and almost this topography, the way that we can hear all these different tones and we can see all these different colors and shadows and dimensions, how she must have been able to do that through her sense of smell
which is
together. Yeah.
No, which is incredible. But what I find
Yeah.
literally more incredible is that, sometimes someone will walk into a room and you'll just read them, right? You look at their outfit,
Yeah.
you look at their demeanor, you listen to their voice and the manner of speaking, and you'll make an idea of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy.
Right.
But the fact that she would do so just through scent is quite incredible,
Mm-hmm.
because that means your scent says a lot about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely more, infinitely more than one can imagine.
Mm-hmm. No,
Infinitely more.
that's really profound when I think about it, because I mean, obviously we're talking more than just our affects, you know, the way our clothes smell and whatever perfumes that we're putting on, but also the smell of ourselves, you know, the smell that we give off, our body, you know, that
Exactly.
that it could very well be like a fingerprint of sorts, to somebody who is that tuned into it.
It is a fingerprint.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of fragrance, because it is a fingerprint, but it's a fingerprint which you can change at will.
Yeah.
That's the subversive beauty of perfume,
Mm.
right? You can be the most manly man, you can be the most butchy, masculine, whatever man, and decide to wear an opium or a femme by
Yeah.
Rosa, and that will say something of you.
Yeah. It can
And
reveal
that's
that
the
there's
beauty
much
of it.
more. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
It, you know, I've never really been, I'm somebody who, you know, is very respectful of anyone expressing how they, you know, any, you know, their gender expression, but I'm rather traditional. I never really, the idea of dressing in what is more, you know, traditionally the opposite gender has never appealed to me, much in the same way that, you know, I guess there's some, it has nothing to do with sexuality. I mean, we don't want to get into that kind of worms these days, of course, but you know what I mean. But I feel like wearing perfume is an opportunity to explore those things in a way that is much more liberating and and sort of sly, you know, because you create these sort of dichotomies that are interesting, and you also can consider even if that dichotomy is detectable. Because I don't think I've ever had somebody say, "Are you wearing a woman's perfume?" I don't think I've ever had that happen. Never.
Exactly. That's the subversive beauty of it.
Yeah.
You know, Barbara Herman. She created Eris Parfum, which I think you know,
Yes.
and we talked about this quite a few times, and she had told me about her time in a what I believe was a Catholic high school, and she had to wear a very feminine uniform,
Mm,
which she really didn't like. So
mhm.
she decided to wear, on top of her feminine uniform with the skirt and everything, she decided to wear grey flannel,
Love it.
which was the most masculine perfume of the era. The thing
Mhm.
is, someone can tell you, oh, you're dressing up as a butch, or you're dressing up as a man, or you're dressing up as a woman, but no one can tell you anywhere at school or in your place of work or in your social group of friends that you're wearing too manly a perfume or too feminine a perfume.
Mhm.
No one can tell you, oh, you're wearing a tuberose, you're
Oh
gay.
goodness. You
Oh my
must be
God,
gay.
you're a woman wearing cedarwood and Isa E Super. Are you a lesbian?
Oh God.
You know, this doesn't exist, and that's the beauty of it. You know,
Right. Right. And I think that, you know, while we might have a lot of opinions on that subject, which, like I said, no Pandora's box for either of us. I think we're all set with that. But with fragrance, I think it's safe to say that it really it becomes less and less relevant as time passes. It really does, because it never really was something that all it was smoke and mirrors. It was all just a
exactly.
story that was given. I mean, we even look at perfumes that were made by the same perfumer and they would practically do the same kind of composition and then market it to men. You know, Bernard Chant
What
was notorious for that.
when you think of Fougère Royale, Fougère Royale was marketed for women
Yes.
when it came out. It was supposed to be for women. It was the end of the 19th century. Perfumes were worn by women, not by men.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow, well, not somehow, we know how, fougères became the epitome of masculinity.
Yes. And initially, it was this sort of, you know, the charming tale of walking through the enchanted forest,
Walking, exactly, finding ferns,
daintily.
whatever. Daintily, it was the Victorian era.
Yeah.
Everyone was all about fern.
Right.
For whatever, I mean, the Victorians were all about everything, fern and mummies and everything, but they were all about fern, and they decided to go through it. And so Fougère Royale came at this moment in time, but it was for women, and it became the epitome, the archetype of masculinity.
Mm-hmm. It's like,
When you think when you look at Rose, for instance,
yes.
one of the first questions you asked me was about Rose, and when you look at Rose, Rose in the West is associated with femininity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Rose in the Middle East is associated with masculinity. Saffron in the West is associated with masculinity because it's leathery, whereas in the East, in the Middle East specifically, it's associated with femininity.
Mm.
Saffron is what you wear on your wedding day. Saffron is only supposed to be worn by women, not by men, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole thing about fragrance. It's subversive. It's just incredible. It's incredible.
It defies anything cultural and temporal. It shifts throughout time, depending upon the place, depending
Which
upon
exactly,
subcultures.
yes, which is why I always keep saying that perfume is the closest thing we have to time travel. And all my
Yes.
friends at the CERN, which is the European Center for Nuclear Research, you know, they discovered the boson of Higgs and etc. I have a lot of friends at the CERN and in NASA that study quantum physics, and I tell them, please try to create a research project around time travel and perfume,
Yeah.
because I really believe, I wholeheartedly believe, that there's an answer here.
Well, I really feel that when I wear fragrances that were developed in the early to, you know, in the 1800s or the early to mid 20th century, that the thing that draws me so much to them is the fact that they are in a way a reflection of the ether of those times. That was, you know, you're smelling how certain people and certain places smelled at a given time. You're not smelling them today out there, but you're able to revisit that even if you weren't alive at the time. And I'm just fascinated with that concept of, you know, you're absolutely right. You know, it's like it comes so close to capturing the essence, if you will, of a certain time without time actually
Exactly,
having to time travel. Yeah.
which is why I first decided to recreate all perfumes. That's
Yeah.
how I started,
Yeah.
because I knew that if I was able to recreate exactly a perfume that was 2 or 3 thousand year old and smell it, my sensory experience would be exactly the same as Alexander the Great's or
Mm,
Cleopatra's. Right? You can't listen. We can't listen to music as we used to
right.
2,000 years ago. We can't read a text as we used to 2,000 years ago because words have evolved. We can't look at a painting the same way we used to 2,000 years ago, because, 2,000 years ago, the Greeks didn't know about blue, about the concept of the blue color. To them, it was a green, right? So our appreciation of a painting nowadays is completely different to the appreciation of a painting 2,000 years ago. The same goes for music, the same goes for text. But the same doesn't go for a perfume. If you smell a perfume right now, that is exactly the same or as close as it used to be, then your experience chemically in your brain is exactly the same. And it is unfathomable.
It makes me think about the possibility, and I know some people might not even want to entertain the possibility, but some theorize that, we have some genetic information in us that is coded from this very distant past, and that to expose ourselves to some sort of sensory information might give us the ability to do a little bit of decoding and opening up these things that are that are that are in our our genome, if you will, to take us back to that I know that this might be far-fetched, and I've often considered, are some of the things that I'm smelling, I'm remembering from past generations, from past lives. Not that I
Yes.
necessarily believe in reincarnation in the conventional sense, but because it's in me that I can the reason why I'm so drawn is somehow,
Yeah, no, I get it.
you
I
know what
get
I
that.
mean? It's yeah.
I not only do I know what you mean, but I will go one step further, because I do believe, and this is very personal, that sense can inform you on your past, of course. But what I keep saying that scents are, and perfume is the closest thing we have to time travel, is that I do believe perfume can inform you on your future. Because if it travels through time, it travels through every point of time, right? And for instance, I was very early on drawn to the scent of frankincense for no reason at all. I didn't grow up with frankincense. I didn't smell frankincense perfumes, but for some reason I was drawn to frankincense fragrances. And I didn't understand why. And then I went to Dubai, discovered the frankincense resin and how to sort it, the varieties and colors, etc. And I had such a visceral connection to that scent that I couldn't explain. And then I came to Paris, started, selling incense to parishes in France and Europe and the US, etc. Kind of defined my entire life. And I couldn't know why I was drawn to the scent of frankincense so early on, until I got baptized. And the day of my baptism, which was 9 years ago, it all made sense, right? It was as if my future self from 9 years ago had talked to, myself before, right? It was as if my being at this moment in time and my baptism with the mass and the incense had drawn me through scent to that very moment in time.
It's interesting. It's like it was sort of
Completely
this
mystic.
starting point, like I was going to say mystical starting
It's
point.
completely mystical.
Yeah.
But the mystical starting point happened after I started looking into frankincense and perfumery.
Yeah.
It's like it was sort of a time loophole. I don't know how you call it, time paradox. It's like the future actually has an effect on your past. Inception kind of thing. I haven't watched Inception, but I imagine that was the point of the movie. I don't know.
I haven't watched it either, but I
Yeah,
believe
but I
so.
imagine that's the whole thing. Basically, the future. It's basically the future conditions the past, and I think
Yes.
that fragrance does that.
Yeah.
If you look at the fragrances you like, you will find fragrances you like or dislike. You will learn things about yourself, whether
Mhm.
from the past or from the future.
Mm. I just want to take a look at this here. We've been asked if we're fans of Guerlain Vetiver. I'm a fan of Guerlain Vetiver.
Oh, me too. Me too. I
Yes.
think it's the best vetiver ever made, really. And also because my best friend who passed away used to wear it.
That's true.
But even then, I loved it.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And I love that it's more than just a vetiver. It's not. It's
It's a
we have
Guerlain vetiver.
yeah with the Guerlain and this tobacco and there's these other elements that are coming into play that
It is
it's
so well balanced
yeah.
and so long lasting, for Christ's sake.
I love
The
that
eau de toilette lasts for like 10, 12 hours.
yes,
It's insane.
and on fabric even longer. Yeah, keeps those top notes intact.
Exactly.
That's where that's what I say to people. If you want those top notes to last, don't try to find a fragrance that has long lasting top notes, because you're going to end up with this very synthetic kind of citrus after a while, and it's going to be nagging. Just spray a little bit on your clothing and
Fabric,
you know
exactly. Yes.
just a little bit on there. The collars are going to hold on to that, and that's how it works. You just have to launder a little bit more, but hey, it's worth
Yes.
it. At least it's more satisfying than trying to find that that great elusive long-lasting citrus. And the
Yes.
ones that claim to be long-lasting citrus, you and I know, there's
Yes.
some jiggery pokery going on there, because there's some citrusy aroma chems that are not meant to be
Well, definitely.
used the way that they're not meant to be used the way that the perfumer is trying to use them, just for the
Yes.
sake of having that bold citrus. Oh, and is smelling very functional. It smells like I've poured some cleaning liquid on me, because it's just
But that's
the naturalism fades.
yes, but that's the only way to make them last.
Right?
Yes, it is. It's technical.
So we have 11 people who are tuned in at the moment. If anybody does have any questions, don't be shy. We have a very inactive chat for this live stream. So just say hello, or ask a question, or mention your scent of the day or night or whatever time of the day it is, in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. I love vetiver in general. I remember the first vetiver that I was enamored with was a vetiver extraordinaire from Frederick Mall. That must have been
Oh, yes.
15, 16 years ago. I mean, now I realize it is quite nice, but I didn't realize there were so many other vetivers that are similar. But that was a huge favorite of mine, and now I have an ungodly amount of vetivers, just as like I have an ungodly amount of fragrances in general. I love the Anicotal vetiver, which I don't think smells
Absolutely.
anything like it used to, from what I heard. I haven't smelled any of the Goutals in the current form, but I have heard that some of them have been reformulated in ways that make them not as quite as recognizable. That one's a lovely one. The Carvan vetiver I do enjoy. There's this Meta Parfumeur Gantier Route vetiver, very earthy, dank, cellar-like vetiver, not for the faint of heart. So that woman that you were mentioning earlier would probably have a fit if she smelled that one, because it's just so unapologetically vetiver. That's a lovely one. It's a lot of nice ones. Yeah. So vetiver. See, the thing is I can appreciate most things in perfume. Some I'm not, some I'm not as enthusiastic about for different reasons, and some I can't really quite explain. One thing that and this is surprising to people, is I've always had a tough time with oud, and I think the reason why is because when I started to get acquainted with agarwood and burning agarwood, the chips, the wood chips, and smelling the oud atars, I really just wanted to get it from that. And I was always underwhelmed when I would smell oud commercial fragrances, because they didn't really capture that at all. Like, most of them do not. So truth be told, I don't have too many oud fragrances in my collection. I just have agarwood and a couple of atars, and that satisfies my yen. Are there any? Are there? Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yes.
No, I was about to say I get where you're coming from. Personally, when it comes to oud, I collect actual oud oils rather than oud perfumes, because when you know the cost of oud, you know that they can't be used in a perfume, really, or maybe at 1% tops. Or,
Right.
I mean, Ruade by Marc-Antoine Gorticato for Parfum Empire used 4% of oud. It's very beautiful. There's pretty much as much oud as there is narcisse. It's a wonderful fragrance, a wonderful oud. But yeah, when it comes to oud, I'd rather just go for the natural oil, single oil,
Right.
literally splurge on it, because it will be very long lasting and wonderful for layering.
Right. Right. I do appreciate some of the oud bases that are used in very subtle ways in perfumes to accent maybe an incense or something like that. But the very oud forward fragrances, especially the oud and rose, like, which was very popular at one time, I just got so grating to me after a while, just everywhere. We have a couple comments that had come through. Scott Burr, or Bear or Burr. Let me know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, or which way is the correct pronunciation. Scent of the day, 8 and Bob, Egypt. Very nice. Michi, Jean Kisse. Just wanted to say hi. Scent of last night, Fianagi. Very lovely. The most recent video that I did was coniferous fragrances, where I discussed fragrances that feature cone-bearing trees like fir and pine and spruce and the like. It's a lovely one. So besides oud, is there anything are there any notes or themes in perfume that you respect but you're not really in love with? Like, they're not your personal favorite, even if you can appreciate them?
Fruity notes in general. I do respect them on a technical level, because they're very hard to create.
Right.
Beautiful
for sure.
pineapple, a beautiful guava, beautiful raspberry or strawberry. They're honestly technically quite difficult to make, and I respect that, but I don't like that. I don't have a fruity perfume. I would never wear. Well, although Chambre La Maison Dieu created a fruity perfume for a project I have with the House of Poetry in Paris, which is absolutely wonderful, and which I want to try to wear, but I'm not sure that I would enjoy wearing it. So in general, fruity notes, I admire the technicality behind them, but I don't like the actual experience that comes with them.
I can relate to that. I can certainly relate to that. I think I'm a little bit picky when it comes to fruit notes. I do appreciate fruit notes as they would appear in chypres, like Rochefort and
peach or something like
Diarella or Mitsuko, as sort of they weren't necessarily fruity perfumes per se, and those fruit notes were not front and center, but the way that they kind of fall into the whole, I appreciate that. But I'm with you as far as, a fruit bowl kind of fragrance where it's just lots of fruits, lots of fruitiness, and that it sort of takes the lead and everything else is secondary. I have a tough time with that. Even with the Delta of Venus, Antoine Lee did an excellent job with guava. Love
I haven't
guava.
smelt it, but I imagine it's wonderful.
It's wonderfully rendered. Love the taste and the smell of guava, but I don't really feel excited to wear something that smells like guava. I'd rather just drink it or eat it.
Yeah, no, I get that.
However,
No, I completely get it. That's the thing with fruits.
I could have, you know what, I could appreciate the guava if it did something interesting with mossiness, or it did something
Oh,
interesting,
yes.
like if it was like a supporting note rather than a main note. I think
Yes.
that's how I appreciate fruit more so, as a supporting note, for
Yeah,
sure.
no, that I get.
We have Scott Bear saying, you got it right the first time, like the animal. Bear, not grizzly though. Teddy bear. Okay. And Philippe asks a very good question. So I didn't understand if Alex has his own brand. Hello there. Could you elaborate on that, please? So people would like to know more about your creations, your perfumes.
So I don't have my own brand. I work for different brands. I'm an indie perfumer. So yeah, that's it. I'm
Where
an
can
indie. I work for different brands.
So what brands
And
can we find your work, or is there an easy way to see where your work is available?
Instagram, really,
Okay.
because I communicate on Instagram
And
mostly.
folks, you can follow Alex at the Perfume Chronicles on Instagram, and he does share some wonderful stuff. And then I also have the website that is in the description of this live stream. Folks, what I think we're going to do is we're going to wrap this up. We're going to kind of start to do. Yes, I'm finally noticing you're okay. All right, Alex. I'm going to let you go so that you can take care of things. But this has been, I'll do the outro myself so that you can get going, because
Okay.
I didn't notice that until nearly 10 minutes ago. But it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope that we can
For
chat
me
more
too.
soon.
For me too, definitely.
Let's get in touch and let's do this again soon, okay?
Let's do. Thank you so much
Okay.
for having me.
You're
I'm sorry
most
I have to get
welcome.
going, but I have
No, I'm sorry I didn't see your
175 samples to fill tonight.
You have your work cut out for you.
Yeah.
All right. Be well now. Take care.
Thank you so much. See you, dear.
Bye-bye. Okay, well, that was a wonderful conversation with Alexandre Helwani. You can visit him at theperfumechronicles.com, or you can follow him on Instagram, The Perfume Chronicles. I think there's some underscores in there, but if you type in The Perfume Chronicles, in the search, then you should easily find his Instagram. So we're running at 5:07 p.m. here Eastern Standard Time here in Massachusetts. We have 17 people tuned in. We actually had an influx of viewers towards the very end, unfortunately. We did have to start this live stream at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But what an enlightening conversation. What an absolute delight it was to chat with him. I think I could have gone, 2 more hours talking with him. It was just so natural. So I do hope to have him back again soon for another discussion. And I do agree, Philippe, he was definitely a joy to listen. I'm just so glad that we could have him as a guest. It really pleases me that I've been able to bring to you folks some fascinating people in the fragrance community, and there's more to come. So just stay tuned, and I will be announcing further guests as we enter the springtime. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, at least. We're going to have another special guest, and I will show his book here. If I may, we're going to have this gentleman. We're going to have Neil Chapman. He will be joining us late April, early May, and the date is as yet to be decided. So he'll be our special guest then, Neil Chapman of Perfume in Search of Your Signature Scent. Excellent resource book. I recommend it. We're going to sign off for now. I will see you again in 2 weeks for another Effluvium. Next week is a week off. No new videos, no live streams, but I'll see you again in 2 weeks. Until then, I hope you all remain in good health and good spirits, and I will talk to you all soon.